Hi, everyone. This is Terry from Swamp Fox Bookstore in Marion, Iowa. We are so excited for you to join us for this virtual event tonight with Leanna Rene Hieber and Andrea Janes to talk about their amazing book, which is perfect for October, A Haunted History of Invisible Women, which is available now. It came out at the end of September. Welcome, Leanna and Andrea, and special guest.
Hi, this is Alice.
Hi, Alice. I just want to give everybody just a brief overview of the book and y'all before we jump in here. So, Leanna Rene Hieber is an actress, a playwright, and the author of 13 Gothic gaslamp fantasy novels for adults and teens for touring Kensington books such as Strangely Beautiful Saga, the Magic Most Foul trilogy, the Eternal Files trilogy, and the Spectral City series. The Strangely Beautiful series hit Barnes & Noble and Border bestsellers list and garnered numerous regional genre awards, with revised editions of the complete series now available from Tor. The Spectral City has been a bestseller across several genres and digital platforms. A four-time Prism Award winner and Daphne du Maurier Award finalist, her short fiction has appeared in numerous anthologies, and her books have been translated into many languages. She tours the country by the light of Tiffany, a meeting with Clara Driscoll, a one-woman theatrical presentation about the 19th century designer of Louis Comfort Tiffany's stained glass lamps. Many times I see those on Antiques Roadshow. A proud member of Performer Unions Actors Equity and SAG-AFTRA. She lives in New York City, where she's a licensed ghost tour guide for Burrows of the Dead and has been featured in film and television shows like Boardwalk Empire and Mysteries of the Museum. Andrea Janes tells ghost stories for a living. She is the co-author of A Haunted History of Invisible Women and the owner and founder of Burrows of the Dead, a boutique tour company dedicated to dark and unusual walking tours of New York City. She is currently at work on a middle grade historical fantasy novel set in New Amsterdam. Her personal obsessions include weird history, slapstick comedians, witches, ghosts, and all things nautical, and beer. She lives in Brooklyn, where she can usually be found by the ocean or near a cemetery. So, a little bit about the book for those of you who are not familiar with it and haven't had a chance to pick it up yet. And I highly recommend that you do, because it is excellent. I loved every minute of it. From the notorious Lizzie Borden to the innumerable haunted rooms of Sarah Winchester's mysterious mansion, this offbeat, insightful, first ever book of its kind explores the history behind America's female ghosts, the stereotypes, myths, and paranormal tales that swirl around them, what their stories reveal about us, and why they haunt us. Sorrowful widows, vengeful Jezebels, innocent maidens, wronged lovers, former slaves, and even occasional axe murderesses, America's female ghosts differ widely in background, class, and circumstance. Yet one thing unites them: their ability to instill fascination and fear long after their deaths. Here are full stories behind some of the best known among them, as well as the lesser known, though no less powerful. So thank you for joining us today, Leanna and Andrea. We're so excited to be able to do this event in your one of the busiest months. It's got to be one of the busiest months of the year for you.
It's always, it's always insane. October is nonstop. We don't have days off until December.
Yep.
So,
well, we thank you for making the time for us.
I appreciate this. Thank you. You caught us early enough for that we still had a moment available. So we're so glad that you did.
Awesome.
I definitely wish we could be there in person, but we love being able to zoom in from around the country. I'm actually joining you from Ohio on book tour. So
great. Well, we're happy. That's the amazing thing, right, about virtual events, is that you can join from anywhere, whether you're in Ohio or you're at home, in the comfort of your living room. So the Haunted History of Invisible Women is a collaboration. We were chatting a little bit about this backstage. Please share the story of how you two met and how this book came to be.
The process. Well, Leanna and I have been working together in the ghost tour biz for some time. Sorry, you guys. You can see the ring light in the reflection of my cabinet. How gauche. So we were working together for a long time doing ghost tours, and then I guess Leanna, you had done a tour, and someone had approached you as an editor, right? About talk about New York City ghosts. And right around the same time, I had been doing a tour about New York City ghosts with a feminist lens. And then I guess one thing led to another, and we started to kind of make all of these connections between the spectral and the feminine or the female. And we came to realize, like the metaphor in the title suggests, you have this kind of like concept of invisibility. You have the woman who's marginalized and overlooked and shunted off to the sidelines. And you have this, the constant invisible labor. And then we just, the idea of, genders being performative. And we started to organize the book into tropes, which was the brainchild of our wonderful editor. She's like, let's organize this by tropes: maiden, mother, witch, madwoman, and so on. And so it's like got all these wonderful parallels, how you have this like constructed identity that in some ways continues in the way a ghost story is crafted and retold after death. So the whole thing just really worked. We both thought very nicely. And it just kind of flowed, I think. One thing flowed from another. It's seamless, a seamless process.
We hope it looks that way. It was a bit of a Frankenstein's monster of putting it together, because the publisher was very excited about the book and kind of pushed our deadline up a little bit. So we were handing chapters off to our editor, like
Surprise!
Piece by piece, into the Google Doc, and being, and bless her for being able to put it all together. It truly was like separate limbs that were all coming together. But again, her structural take about the sections of the book really helped us feel free to dive into the characters and the people themselves, and make sure that we were giving them as much life as possible, rather than worrying about it being organized by location, or really the people had to speak to us. That's how some aspect of the history, or some aspect, the quirk of their ghost story, one or the other, something had to hook and grab us. And we felt like we each had to have something to say. We had to figure out our way in, our angle in on each of these. And that was definitely a process. And that changed, our feelings changed about these people the more that we learned and the more that we researched, for sure.
Yeah, and we didn't want to. Well, I was just going to say, like, just kind of piggybacking on what Leanna said, we didn't want it to be geographical because we didn't want it to be a guidebook, and we didn't want it to be chronological because we didn't want to give the impression that it was going to be comprehensive. And the examples that we chose, the reason we chose them was because exactly what she said, they had to speak to us. We had to have something to say about them. We didn't want this to be like a printed out Wikipedia. It's like you can research the facts about these people with, relative ease, depending on how well known they are. But like, we wanted there to be some commentary about these lives and these women who may have been real or may have been amalgams of somebody. So, like there had to be, like she said, a way in.
So whose story do you think changed the most for you? Like, you knew one thing, and then through your research and talking to people, what stories changed the most for you?
Leanna's thinking, so I'll jump in because there was a couple and it wasn't so much the stories changed. It was like my assumptions about them changed, or the way I was going to frame them changed. Like, I knew about the presence of a lot of like Old West, and frontier, not just Old West, but like frontier, so including like Alaska or whatever, sex workers of the 19th century. I knew there was a lot of haunted hotels, like, these Travel Channel, like the Red Onion Saloon. And I knew that of the existence of these ghosts. And going into this chapter, I was like, okay, so a lot of these ghosts were, murdered by somebody in an intimate setting. And like, surely there will be like a lot of anger among these murdered sex workers. Surely they will be wanting to wreak vengeance from the other side or something, So I was like, okay, let me go look for this kind of story. And I started to look for that kind of story and didn't find it. What I found instead were a lot of narratives where the women portrayed in these stories were very seductive, sexy, beautiful, fun. They still laughed and danced and smelled great and left pearls on your pillows. And I was like, oh, these girls are still working, So for me, it was like a very intense process of just like figuring out. I was like, well, what does that say about us? What do I want to say about this? And we knew, like, we had this meeting where we didn't want to just talk about this as being a transactional enterprise. Because again, a lot of these places still remain businesses, restaurants, saloons, hotels. So that was a chapter where, and I think you can see me like at the end of the chapter doing these like intense mental gymnastics, trying to figure out like, what does this all mean? Why do we portray these women like this? Um, I will let you draw your own conclusions. If you get to the end of the chapter and you're like, this woman clearly broke her brain trying to figure this out, or she made something of it. I don't know. I'll let you decide if it worked or not. And then the other one for me was Mary Surratt, who I was like, oh, maybe I have some sympathy kind of for this woman. She was like a widow just trying to get by. And then I read her biography. I was like, nope, definitely a murderer and a pro-slavery murderer. So I was like, huh, okay. But as a feminist project, including women who are not easy to digest, I thought was like, okay, so let's have a whole section called Bad Girls, shall we? You know?
Well, and probably in my experience, not a woman that, even though she's part of a huge piece of history, so those of you who don't know, she's involved with Abraham Lincoln's assassination, they don't usually talk about her in your history classes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was educational for me.
And yet, she's like the kind of the number 2 ghost in the Lincoln assassination conspiracy bunch. Like John Wilkes Booth is mentioned all the time, the guilty figure of John Wilkes Booth, and then her. Like none of the other co-conspirators. So it's Booth and her. So yeah, those were the big ones where I was like, where's this journey taking me? Where am I going with this?
For me, the one that that has the least amount of spectral sightings in a ghost book. So we had to have, there had to be some kind of ghost sighting or ghost mention somewhere for a character. And I say character, I don't mean character, I mean a person, because these are real people. But some of them were characters, though. Like some of them were almost larger than life. So I mean it in that sense. For this literal folk legend, I had to realize, okay, the ghost story here is pretty thin, but the folk legend is fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I just had to sort of massage the concept of the one entry in ghost lore where you find Lucy Dutton. So Lucy Dutton is the correct adventures of the wandering woman. And so she's in our Mad Women chapter because she did have a psychic and psychological break when she had a tragedy befall her, and her heart was broken by her love, and she just couldn't process it. And she had this break, and she went into this kind of rhapsodic and detached wandering state of semi-religious ecstasy for 30 years in the middle of the 1800s in upstate New York, which is cold. And so she just wandered from county to county. Her span spanned 3 counties in very harsh and very hilly terrain of upstate New York. And the kind of the incredible thing about it is that people just took her in. They just were like, okay, this is Crazy Luce. That was her nickname. And she had this folk marker. That's kind of how I found her. Was New York Folklore Society has these myths and legend markers that are around the state. And so her marker came up, and I thought this was really fascinating. And I'm obsessed with upstate New York, it being the center of the burned over district, the center of spiritualism, the center of all these different offshoots of religion. There's just something in the air up there that is just very spiritually charged, right? So I'm learning about that every county historical society, Cortland County, Madison County, and one other county has like stories about Lucy Dutton wandering around, and like everyone's grandparents knew stories of their grandparents who had let her in to like lay by the fire for a night before she got restless and wandered off again, flowers in her hair like Ophelia. And I'm obsessed with this concept. I went to try to go find her geological or her actual folklore marker. It's not there. It has also gone wandering. There is a geolocation tag. There's pictures of it on the internet, but it is not where it says it is. I have no idea where it is. So I'm like, wait, is this lady? Who is this lady? That everybody has all of these stories about her, and she was in the papers, and she was in all these different accounts. There's so much there, but there's no grave marker. There's no like, I wasn't entirely sure how to get my head around her other than, okay, I'm going to tell you these recorded stories and these little typed out pieces on card catalog like little card catalog cards that were tucked in and typed by the Cortland County Historical Society typist to go with something that was donated to the Cortland County Historical Society about Lucy Dutton from 50 years prior. And so wading through all of this and then going, oh gosh, I really hope there's a ghost story here because I really, really want to talk about this lady and how our relationship to madness in this case was actually quite sweet and quite loving and quite refreshingly gentle. In that this was not a story of suffering. It actually really wasn't. And so I was able to find, okay, here's this one ghost story on an online account of a sad woman who lost her beau to her sister and is wandering Lake Cazenovia, where she had been born and where she'd resided, wandering the lake. And it's in one haunted directory. And I was like, okay, that's enough. And then my editor was like, is there more ghost stories there? And I'm like, I'm just going to talk very eloquently and poetically about wandering the lake because there's one mention of her, but I'm like, but she's so interesting that she became this folk hero, a la like, a ballad should be sung about her anyway. So that was the case of like hoping to goodness that there's enough there that the reader will accept that she's part of our ghost lore because I'm kind of obsessed with her. So.
I am too. That chapter is one of my favorites in the whole book.
Thank you.
I was just like, this is amazing.
I just love her.
What was the spookiest thing that happened to either of you while researching or writing the book? I think one of you may have talked a little bit about something that happened in the book too, in one of the chapters, if I remember right. But maybe that's not the spookiest thing that happened.
I mean, just dealing with 14 West 10th Street, just dealing with it again for me. Like, so 14 West 10th Street is nicknamed the Murder House in Manhattan, and it's the chapter in the book. Our book is called An Unreliable Narrator. And I really felt like I was an unreliable narrator in writing that chapter. And Andrea and I, we both have lots of feelings about this address. But my chapter, when I sort of gave it over to Andrea and I said, here, add what you want to add. She's like, no, it's good.
It's funny because like I did that for two reasons. First, it was this very personal, and it was a very perfect, like the structure of the chapter. The structure of the chapter was so perfect. I was like, I can't add anything to this. It's like Jenga. I'm not going to pull anything out, add anything. So then I was like, one, this is a very personal Leanna story. And two, so people have often asked me like if I like to do investigations, if I like to hang out in haunted places, and if I slept at the Lizzie Borden house and stuff like that. And I'm like, no, hell no. Like when I'm in a place that feels haunted to me, my first instinct is to get the hell out of there. And on the brief moments where I've had like an odd feeling in the Merchant's House Museum, I have wanted very much to leave at that moment. And in 14 West 10th Street, I was sneaking around like I was in my own little Scooby-Doo episode. I was sneaking around, walking into this private residential building that I had no right to be in. And as I was walking around in that building, I felt very unwelcome. I did not want to be there. I physically felt the air resisting me as though I were moving through water. Like I could feel repulsion. And I was like, bye, I'm leaving. And I think part of the reason I stayed away from that chapter was because it was a perfect Leanna story and because I just didn't really feel like spending a lot of mental time there. It's really spooky. It's a very strange house.
And it's really draining to dive into and talk about, as it was for Jan Bryant Bartell, the woman who I'm kind of trying to bring back into the fore as the center of this story, who was kind of giving us warning signs about that house long before the actual famous murder that took place there took place. So she was really the canary in the coal mine. And that's really what hurts my soul, is that she died after leaving that house. She finally got out of that house. And then it's, as I say in the chapter, the house took her in the end in its own way. And so it's this dread, it's this absolute dread with that. So I keep sitting with that chapter as, I think in some ways, some of my strongest writing, but also for me, some of the most harrowing, in that that house has haunted me since I first moved to New York. So it is very personal. But with that, there's this sort of after after effect where like it's like an aftertaste in your mouth and you just have to kind of keep being like, ah, blah. Hopefully it makes for good reading.
It did.
It's funny the things we do for you people, but it's funny though you mentioned that it's draining because it is oddly draining to sift through hundreds of accounts of dead women. It's oddly draining emotionally. It's very taxing. It can be very triggering. I was triggered more than once writing several of those chapters. And it's the weirdest thing that happened to me, and I cannot honestly tell you this is a supernatural thing. It was more of a psychological thing. But this one chapter I wrote about Savannah, Georgia, I wasn't even in the location while I wrote it. I wrote it from home. I've been there, but I wrote it from home. And it exerted such a bizarre hold on my mind. I became very obsessive about it. I became very obsessive about the women involved in that story, also about the man involved in that story too. I found myself starting to have like huge amounts of sympathy for him, and like these characters, again, they're real people, but they are characters in our minds. Like one of the ghosts might be real, might not. I don't know. She could be. There's evidence that she might have been a real person. So, they started to haunt me, the story of Molly, Matilda, and Francis at the Sorrelweed House. And so that was a chapter where, again, I didn't really know where I was going with it when I started. I knew I wanted to write about it. I knew I had some serious intellectual debts to pay to a scholar who had already written pretty much the definitive text on that house in the context of the ghost tour industry, Taya Miles. She wrote about it in Tales from the Haunted South. So I was like, I know I owe her this intellectual debt. I'm building on her work because I had the same feelings, but she expressed them so much better. And I was like, where am I going with this? And by the time I got to the end of that chapter, I realized that whether these ghost stories were fake or not, and they likely are fake, the ones on the tour that you're told by the guides, they became incredibly real to me in my own mind. And so that's when I called that chapter Willing the Ghosts to Life. Mm-hmm. And I think the conclusion I drew is that in some cases it might be immaterial if the ghost story is real or not, because they can become real for you if you spend enough mental time with them. So like that chapter was, can I swear on this show? Is this PG?
PG-13.
I'll put it to you that way. That was a mind F. That chapter was a total mind F. Like I would
appreciate the thumbs up from the audience on the swearing.
Yeah, I don't know. I was like,
the mind F is good. That's good. It's
I would be walking down my hall at 3 a.m, going to the bathroom, scared to look in the mirror, because I was like terrified. Yeah. Oh, and that other one in New Orleans I didn't even want to write about, Madame LaLaurie.
Oh, LaLaurie, Madame LaLaurie, the LaLaurie mansion. I couldn't write about the LaLaurie mansion, and frankly, it's one of those. That's just one of those tales of evil. That's
a big old nope.
It's a big old. When I was standing in front of the LaLaurie mansion, I didn't realize where I was standing. I didn't know that history. I just started scratching at my wrist to the point where I'd actually opened my own skin standing in front of that house. And I didn't know it. And then my friend like looks over and swats my hand. And then they tell me the story of this woman who tortured enslaved people in her house. And it's so horrific. So there's a lot of this stuff that like does, if you're not careful, like you do have to sort of walk away at a certain point. And which was hard when our publisher pushed up our deadline. And then we had some things that we had to rearrange within the book itself. There was the book took some twists and turns along the way. And there was a point where Andrea was such a badass that she literally burst a blood vessel in her eye. She was writing so hard. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it's
gross. I have photos. It was horrifying.
Yeah, literal blood, sweat, and tears for those.
I don't know if I sent you the photo or just described it. But there was, I think I had to add a paragraph about LaLaurie in the intro to some chapter. Because I was like, I want people to know that we're like aware of the existence of this ghost story, but like deliberately chose not to engage with it. I was too ambivalent.
So nasty.
So yeah.
Right. Well, and also too, I think if you only lift it, you made the good point in that chapter, Andrea, that you made the very good point in that if we look at her as this outlier and be like, oh, look at that, it absolves us of the fact that people were committing abuses against their slaves all the time. And this one is the scapegoat one.
Yeah.
And it's like, So, it's engaged with, but it's also like, let's not pretend that these things also weren't, there weren't other tens of hundreds of women just like her.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And I'm trying to think, I was like, is that Time Alice or someone else? I hopefully cited some references to that, because that was that idea of the absolution being granted by the outlier. That's someone else's idea. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, totally. When you create a monstrous female, in this case, a monstrous white female, you create like exactly this specter, and you can be like, well, we're not like that, but like, yeah, you totally were. So exactly, it's a complicated business. It's a complicated world to inhabit, for sure, and to monetize.
Is there a story or stories that got cut from the book?
We had to cut New York stories. Yeah.
Yeah. We wanted to, like, we're New York tour guides, right? So we have so many great New York stories. So that was really the thing that we wanted the most, was to put all of our favorite New York stories in. But Kensington was very smart in that they're like, no, let's make sure we have appeal across the country. Okay, great, fine. So we definitely had to take out some of our favorite New York ghosts, but we'll try to bring them back for a sequel. So everybody buy this book so we can do a sequel. I find myself writing about some of the ones I wanted to include for some other publications, but I want to expand upon those in the sequel. So my favorite of those concerns Marion Hooper Adams, who was a DC socialite in the 19th century and possibly the woman who inspired Henry James to write Daisy Miller and Portrait of a Lady. And she has this monument in Rock Creek Cemetery that's this beautiful Auguste Saint-Gaudens statue, but it's not like dedicated to her. And her husband, after she took her own life, did not mention her ever again, didn't mention her in his autobiography, even though it was said that he truly loved her. So she was absolutely erased from everything, from her own monument, from a book that should have at least noted how much of a presence she was as a socialite and helping his career, things like that. So I wrote about her for a journal called The Feminine Macabre, which is a great collection of, it's basically a women's journal of the strange and unusual, and compiled by Amanda Woomer. So I knew that she was having an open call for other articles, and I was like, oh, I didn't get a chance to put this one into the book, so I'm going to do this for The Feminine Macabre. But then as I wrote this article, I'm like, yeah, but I want to do a whole lot more. So I want to do actually a whole chapter on her. So that's, it's funny that it's like, okay, this was left out. So I wrote about it, and now I want to write about it again.
Because it's an addiction. I definitely felt like we could have had some more ghost brides in there. I felt like we could have had more Hollywood, more like stars. It's just, if they didn't make it, it's because we didn't have enough meat on the bones to get those stories in there. So, yeah, I would love to do some more ghost brides. I would love to do some more Hollywood stars. I would love to do Marilyn. And we, like we said, we had to cut out a lot of New York City stories, so it wouldn't be too boring and repetitive. But there is a really cool one in Brooklyn that involves a woman who was trapped in a secret chamber and starved to death there. And it's like a pretty insane story. And the craziest thing about it is it's actually supported by historical record. Like, the house was there, the secret chamber was there, the man who owned it was there. It's all like in the New York Historic Society. Like, it's crazy. So yeah, volume 2 for that one, definitely.
Volume 2, yeah, absolutely.
It must be, is it somewhat rewarding when you find out like a story like that is supported? The historical record supports it as well. It's not all legend and hearsay.
Yeah.
Yeah, rewarding / creepy. I mean, this guy sounded like a total monster, but yeah, it is. It is. You discover that you're not perpetuating a whole lot of damn fool nonsense, that you're like, oh, okay, there's some heft to this legend. I worry sometimes.
The converse is also true, though. Like the Witch's Curse of Bucksport, Maine. I was really glad that that's completely unsubstantiated, because all of the things that they said that this that this man did, none of that is supported. So I'm like, oh, he wasn't this terrible monster. The only thing he was, he was named, the city was named, Bucksport was named for Mr. Buck. That was about it. And he was a famous name in the city. So yeah, I was kind of glad that it was not a Salem Witch Trials Part 2 at all.
Right.
It was absolutely fabricated. So in that case, it was like, oh, good. It's one less case of a man being monstrous. Okay, great.
I kept thinking of your chapter, Leanna, because I was watching Paranorman with my kid on Saturday night. Yeah. And that whole narrative, I was like, this is so much like the Witch of Bucksport, Maine.
It's so absurd. And, we do, like, just to reassure audiences here tuning in, like, we are not all doom and gloom in this book. I promise you that there's legitimate humor in this book. And there's some ghosts who are absolutely hilarious. So I laughed out loud so many times reading Andrea's chapter about Joan Rivers.
That was one of my favorite chapters too, Andrea and Leanna.
I
love Joan, and I'm obsessed with my hometown girl, Ma Green, Mary Becker Green. I'm obsessed with her. She's a steamboat captain. She was the first woman to get a steamboat pilot's license in the United States, and she haunts the Delta Queen, the ship where she died, and she's still watching over it. And she is epic. So there's definitely some very fun and sort of joyful spirits in this, because, being a part of ghost lore is not only one emotional quality, it's everything. It's all that humanity has to offer. That does not change in the corporeal versus the incorporeal realm.
Ghosts, they're just like us. But yeah, no, I loved the Joan Rivers chapter too. And like, again, not only is this book not all doom and gloom, it's also not like a bunch of like smarty pants myth busting, like, oh, this isn't real. Your favorite ghost stories are nonsense. We don't want to do that. We don't want to suck the fun out of life. And also, like I said earlier, maybe it doesn't even matter at all. As long as you know where legend and reality diverge and the legend isn't exploiting or subjugating anybody, cool. So, but the Joan Rivers chapter, again, like we were talking earlier about these kind of gentle and sweet ghosts, and the female friendship in that chapter was so touching to me and so sweet. Basically, if you haven't read the chapter yet, Joan Rivers moves into a haunted apartment and makes friends with the ghost who lives there. And the combination of her personality and that story, yeah, I love it. I may have cried watching Celebrity Ghost Hunters while researching that show.
It just seemed very Joan Rivers that would be what she would do. That's what I thought when I read it.
It was so Joan. I have to admit though, like if any ghost ever woke me up at 3 a.m., I would not befriend that ghost. I would be really upset. I'd be really mad. Too. Yeah, but she had a higher tolerance for, I guess, lack of sleep.
So several times in the book, you mentioned the gross commercialization of these stories and of the ghosts and people, marketing them in a way that isn't necessarily sharing the whole truth. I admit, when I travel, I have gone on a few ghost tours. I remember going on one in London and one in Old Alexandria in Virginia. So how does one find a reputable ghost tour company that sort of layers the history with the legends like your book does?
It's funny because I was actually thinking, I was like, maybe I should start an association of like various ghost tour companies. And if they like have the imprimatur of that association, they're legit. Because like there are a lot of people operating throughout the country who do a really good job with this material. And like, I'm not anti-ghost tour. I take ghost tours everywhere I go. That's the first thing I do when I go to a new city. I look up, where's the ghost tour, when and where and how much.
And it is our business. Yeah. It's not like we're saying that we're very aware this is our business. All we're saying and all we're asking of our audience and of fellow people in the industry is be sensitive about it and be comprehensive about it.
Yeah. Just be respectful. Although I laugh so hard when I see a ghost tour company's website and they're like, the most accurate tours in town. I was like, well, history is a shifting, whatever. But I would say, look for people who seem to be acknowledging. You can tell, like in their marketing materials, you can tell who's good. And like a couple of places we have been told, I haven't been to San Antonio, but we've been told the Sisters Grimm tours down there are really good for separating fact and fiction. Bar Harbor Ghost Tours in Maine is really cool. It's run by an Indigenous woman. In Salem, I know you have a friend who's a tour guide there, and they're very responsible and work really hard.
Yeah. Sebastian Crane in Salem, And yeah, he works for Remember Salem. Is the place where he works, and he's cited in the book, very aware of Salem's kind of almost antithetical, sort of almost paradoxical relationship to the horrors of the witch trials, to the fact that it's now called Witch City. That is a cognitive dissonance, and it is a very evident in that place. So as long as you are, looking for a tour guide who acknowledges that dissonance and then can help you really truly find the people behind these stories, that's, we are in a capitalistic society that there's no escaping that. So there's no way that there's any pure ideological purity that we can put into this. It's all very complex, and we're just trying to do the best that we can. A sort of a concept of, like, the Wiccan motto is, harm no other, do what you will. That's kind of how I am about how I write. And so, and the stories that I want to lift up. If you are traveling if you're going to a plantation, take a tour from a Black tour guide. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but guess what? History is uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I mean, I couldn't have said it any better myself. The complexity of the capitalism reality, the ocean we all swim in. Just think of your storyteller as a person who's performing some service or labor, who deserves to be fairly compensated for it. And yeah, look for people who may be different from the mainstream, who may be offering different perspectives, who are unafraid to have conversations. Like, a really good way to figure things out is, like, look at somebody's blog if they have one. What kind of sources are they citing? Who are they, what are their references? Like, when they're tweeting stuff, like, is it all silly memes, or like are there thoughtful links? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can kind of suss that out if you want to. But I do feel like it might be a helpful resource if we put something on our website that, like, lists some of our favorite places around the country.
Yeah.
I do think people are doing a lot better work now than they were 10 years ago when I started in this business. I have noticed a trend towards people being more inclusive, being more thoughtful, caring more about history. It does seem to be, overall, the market seems to be getting better. And again, I can't emphasize enough how problematic plantation tourism is. So, like, just exactly what Leanna said, like, look for a guide who will have these good conversations with you.
So what books, I know you mentioned a couple in the book itself. What books do you recommend for readers who want to learn more about sort of that true history behind ghost stories?
Well, Colin Dickens' Ghostland was really good.
Yeah, please just honestly look through our bibliography, because we're really passionate about the sources that we cite. The most invaluable thing for me writing the Sarah Winchester chapter, which was my biggest chapter, and also the one I was really nervous about, because she is famous and her house is famous, and there's a famous lot of misinterpretation about her. Yes. So I was really interested in separating fact from fiction while still being an entertaining chapter. That was absolutely the hardest line I had to walk, of not being a buzzkill about your haunted house. That was tough. But Captive of the Labyrinth by Mary Jo Ignoffo is a fascinating biography, and it was like the underpinning of that. But yeah, Ghostland for sure. Taya Miles' Tales of the Hounded South. I mean, these, if you're particularly curious about, any of these ghosts, there's something cited in every chapter. So, one of those things, some of the stuff that we've cited, it may or may not answer your questions, but many of the things were at least helpful in us figuring out the tack that we were taking with these things. So, and also we're still unearthing things. We just, in our one of our chapters, I can't say fully because I don't think the museum has released this information yet. The museum just found out something that they had been telling people for a long time was not true. And they're like, oh, guess what? And we're like, oh, wow. Yeah. So, second edition, we're going to have to be like, by the way, we've been telling this way for a long time. And it's fascinating because even the way it was mistaken is an interesting thing to uncover. So it's just like these layers and layers and layers. And you can't, we're doing the best we can with the information we have, because history is imperfect and it depends on who wrote it down, and half the time they wrote it down wrong. So
It's a game of telephone.
No, I was like literally staring at my bookshelf while you were talking to add something to the recommendations. I love Catherine Tucker Wyndham. She writes about Alabama a lot. And I love Ruth Ann Music, writes about West Virginia a lot. I have to say that those little tiny, like skinny regional ghost books, like Ghosts of Southern, Western, North Carolina's Northwest Triangle, like those teeny tiny, like really hyper local ones, I kind of love those. I think they're really, really fun. And you, like, if you want to be super conscientious about it, you can follow up pretty easily with local historical societies and libraries. You can fact check most of the stuff that's in those books, but like, I am addicted to those books. I get them every town I go to, every place I visit. I love them.
I just got one from Denver. It's Haunted Denver. I got it at the Molly Brown house because I'm like, oh, we got to write about Titanic ghosts.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Cedar Rapids actually has a connection to the Titanic.
One
of the historic. There's a historic house in town, and a couple who lived in it. They were on the Titanic, and she survived, and he did not.
Yeah.
The Titanic is like the Kevin Bacon of 19th century steamship travel. Like everybody has some Titanic. We do a Titanic tour in April, and like it's a ton of fun. Also, full disclosure, another tour that I've broken down and cried on at the end. It's amazing. So yeah, I will happily support the inclusion of more Titanic content.
Yeah, and realizing like, oh hey, we've got, I don't know, there's a lot there. So we, you know, every time that we've been, you know, having these conversations with you, with audiences where, you know, people have been telling us additional ghost stories as we go. I wrote down, I was just in St. Louis. I was there in person and Andrea joined us virtually. And I wrote down so many things to follow up on a card, because we were like, oh, have you heard about this? Have you heard about that? So, and some of them were ones that we had heard about and we're like, okay, and had chosen not to include because they didn't quite work with the structure that we had. But now it's like, all right, now that we've been, you know, now that this has come back around, we're going to have to look into that again, kind of thing. So yeah.
And a lot of like our sources were like 19th century newspapers, because that's just a rich source for ghost stories. But then also lately I'm just craving more and more to just talk to people and like their moms and their dads, and like I'm joining weird Facebook groups where people just get ghost stories. I swear to God, it's crazy. And I don't know. I feel like the longer I'm kind of in this world, the more I want to go to sources that are kind of like non-academic at the moment. I don't know. Though I do truly love, like, you know, Phantom Presence, Indigenous Presence, Colin Thrush collection. So, you know, it's like I'm of two minds. I want to be super, super responsible and like cite all these academic sources. And at the same time, I'm like, so tell me that thing that your uncle said his friend saw back in 75, you know, like
because we're also, this is also the business of folklore. So this is also, we are engaging in both. We're trying to be both academic and folklorists at the same time. And those things are not at cross purposes.
No.
Because folklore is absolutely valid and oral histories are absolutely valid. And to say otherwise is classist.
Yeah, well, that's what music was doing. She was collecting all that. So
absolutely. And so it's really valid. But
there's usually some truth behind that folklore, that legend, as you found. And I've, you know, as I've looked at things and done, you know, my own research on things, you find that there is the reason it sticks around is because there's a lesson to be learned there, but it is based in some kind of fact or truth.
I'm wasting hours and hours and hours every day reading the Jezebel Scary Stories comments thread. There's like 400 comments.
Well, I'm curious what will be the takeaways from that, because there will be takeaways from that as you go. But yeah,
so far, the scariest stories all seem to involve a human element. Like there's not that many scary ghosts. They're all like scary dudes. Jezebel. Yeah, it's like a scary dude in a car or like in the backyard or something. Yeah.
So I want to just put out this to anybody that's watching the event live. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll get to them. We have about 10 minutes left. So I think this question has sort of already been answered. And I think when we were talking backstage too, you answered this too. Will there be a follow-up book?
we're literally, we were having a back and forth conversation with our agent about this as we speak, because just publishing, you have to plan so far in advance. And while we do not have an official go ahead from Kensington, we want to at least try to put it forward. A lot of that is out of our control because publishing is based on sales numbers. So if you like what we're talking about, I'm sorry to go back to that crass commercialization, but this is one of those things where, tell your friends. And we think we have something here with this, and we want to just keep telling stories. So yes, and we will keep telling stories until we are stopped from telling stories. So that would be at the end of my life when I become a ghost. So
Yeah,
and then I will still be telling
after we
stories.
die, we're still going to come back and be like, did you hear the one about, I'm going to haunt a library, I think, when I die. Where are you going to haunt when you die?
Pretty houses that I would like to have lived in. So like I'd like to be a traveling ghost who just goes from one Victorian mansion to the next, like a lodger. Yeah, so just show up and go around like all of these beautiful 19th century venues, but like in my regalia, and just go home to the era that I love.
That's like a novel waiting to be written, my friend.
Yeah, actually, I probably should do that. That would be good for my fiction. So yes, so per Lisa's comment, how much have real ghosts influenced my fiction? All the time. There's a lot of stuff about the spirit world that is very much how I see the spirit world. A lot of my drive, especially in the Spectral City series, which is my most recent series, Eve Whitby is a medium, and she is trying to, do right by the spirit world and try to help them have their stories told, and to try to help them have sort of a bit of rest and feel seen and heard and respected. I gave, and as I say in my introduction to this book, I gave that drive to Eve because I have it myself. So I feel like I have a connection to the spirit world, and I've had it since I was a kid because of some weird things that happened to me when I was little that kind of opened that doorway. So and it's been fun to sort of be in this kind of slightly Mulder and Scully relationship with Andrea. So although she's definitely has some Mulder moments, but there's a little bit more of the Scully in that relationship, and a little bit more of the Mulder in that relationship. But it's been very funny when there's been like, oh, there's a door open one way or another, or where I will suddenly put on my skeptic hat. But yeah, the real I can't tell you exactly how much the real ghost stories have influenced my fiction, because it's literally so entwined, because I have never written any book without a ghost in it. So it's literally like, I have no idea how not write a ghost in a book. No idea. So Barbara Young was asking about which chapter talks about LaLaurie. Oh, that's going to be in Andrea's Bad Girls section.
Yeah, that's the section introduction. So it's not an actual chapter. She's just mentioned in the introduction to the overall, Bad Girls.
Yeah,
section.
we didn't really want to give her that much play, to tell you the truth. We had to mention her because people expect it, especially after American Horror Story Coven. But we were like, yeah, no, we got to mention her, and then we're going to move on.
I didn't feel she deserved to be enshrined in any way.
Right. I agree entirely. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. Spectral City are I don't know, those books. I love my debut series, my Strange and Beautiful series, so much because those were my first books. But the Spectral City books were really my sort of me talking about my spiritual manifesto, to be perfectly honest. So those Spectral City books are really so deeply from my heart, and sort of my, the dedication page on the last book is, to the spirit world, may we be a force for good. So that's my hope.
So we've talked a lot about ghosts, which influences both your lives quite a bit. What's one thing you wish people would ask you about, and would you like to share that thing? It doesn't have to be anything.
It's funny. I was thinking about that question. I
know. Yeah. Well, I feel like for me, I want people to ask me questions about the character in terms of my fiction. I feel like the nonfiction, people are asking all kinds of fascinating questions, and I don't really feel like there's been anything that I'm like, oh, why haven't you asked this about the nonfiction? For my fiction, I do I do really love when people really get into my characters. So I kind of like would love if people would ask me about like little minutia about them, because like they're real people. Because when they're real for the reader, then I'm just delighted, and then I love to just kind of go into that almost fan fiction moment with you. So that's what I would say in terms of my fiction, because I feel like we've had a pretty well-rounded discussion about this book. And maybe because and in some ways, maybe because we're actually asking all these questions. We try very hard not to tell you what to think as a reader about the paranormal. We leave it very open. This book is wide open for skeptics and believers and everybody in between, and we welcome your existential questions, as this is a big one itself. So I think in some ways that's why it's been kind of wide open.
Yeah, I've had some people have come in and they've looked at it and like, well, they probably are talking about how they don't exist. And no, it's not that at all. They're not telling you one way or the other. You get to make the decision. This is the stories behind those legends, the ghost stories themselves, and you get to make the call whether you think it's real or not.
Yeah, I think it would be pretty arrogant to tell someone point blank like ghosts don't exist. Say,
Right,
well, how
right.
do you know? So the questions that I wish people would ask me include: would you like a 3-book deal? And may I leave you my entire fortune? Those are the questions I don't get asked enough. The answer to both is yes.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know if you saw this in the chat, but Barbara said that she may have had an experience with Lori in NOLA.
I mean, I wouldn't doubt it. The energy around that house is absolutely toxic. And like I mentioned earlier, I actually broke my skin because I was scratching at my wrist so hard nervously out in front of that space. So, after touching that house. Yeah. So that's the energy of that house is nasty. Nasty, nasty. So yeah, so I wish you well and all of that, and hope you just kind of like shook it off afterwards, because that's what I kind of have to do after 14 West 10th Street has an air of a suffocating air that is also a similar sort of evil in its own way, different but similarly nasty, and I have to shake it off and always tell my whoever I'm leading there in my tours to also shake it off afterwards.
Well, I hope to get to New York City and take one of your tours sometime.
Yes.
They sound amazing.
Yes, come join us.
I kind of want to go to Iowa, so we could do an apartment swap.
So there you go.
Let's do it.
Nice.
Is there any last? Oh, there's one more question. Do you ladies prepare spiritually to deal with the ghosts?
I do personally, yes. So I practice a bit of psychic shielding, and I encourage anyone who is sensitive to energies to do the same thing. And what I mean by that changes depending on who you are, because I'm not going to tell you how to psychically shield. It's just a matter of like making sure that your energy extends beyond your body to give you a little bit of a wall there. Not because I don't want there to be like an encounter possibly for my guests, but at the same time, I don't know what manner that would take. So I'm not trying to invite anything. And personally, I also have to get through my job and deal with being in New York City, which is already unpredictable in and of itself. I don't need an extra X factor on top of that. So for me, it's a matter of boundaries. If I'm in a research mode, if I'm in a place where I'm not having to guide a tour, I will be much more open, provided it's a place that has an energy that I feel I would be conducive with. Like Andrea had said earlier, there's spaces that we just won't necessarily want to go in because we don't like the energy there.
So there's one more question too. Andrew, if you didn't have anything, did you have anything to add to that?
I was sort of reading a question about this murder house, and I thought it was sort of related to Leanna's reply. So this comment was: come to the murder house in Alaska, Iowa.
Yes.
So is it haunted?
Yes. It's probably one of the most, I would say, probably one of the most well-known houses in Iowa to be haunted. There was an murder that's never been solved there. From my understanding,
I would see the outside, but I don't fare well in the interior of those spaces personally.
I gotta say that again, and I am like generally speaking more skeptical, less sensitive than Leanna, but I don't. Fun fact about me: people don't expect this from me because they think I'm going to be super into true crime, especially after that chapter I wrote about Lizzie Borden. But Lizzie accepted, who I have a lifelong obsession with. I don't like murder. Shockingly enough, don't like murder, don't like serial killers, don't watch true crime, and won't go into a premises where a murder occurred. Like, if I were a law enforcement individual solving the crime and, bringing people to justice, sure, I would do it. But I'm not. As a voyeur, I'm not interested. And as somebody who I guess might have some sensitivities that I maybe am not acknowledging, but yeah, going into the premises of a place where someone took a human life is not high on my list of like things I want to do.
Yeah,
Again,
I don't really feel like I need to have that kind of experience in that to still get the facts right about the murder that I am discussing in the book. So, following up, Barbara, I see you say that your follow up, that letting people spend the night in that space. I have spent the night in haunted places, but I curate which of those haunted spaces it is. I even talk about it in the book. The Morris Jamel Mansion lets people spend the night there. It is haunted, but I've never had a really overwhelmingly negative feeling there. I've had a much more fond, like the house and the staff and all of us were kind of fond of Eliza, the definitely most documented ghost in that house. She's the lady of the house. And so the strange things that happened there were us almost having like a conversation via light with the lady of the house. So that for me was much more comfortable than engaging in that type of more negative energy that led to a death. That's not necessarily something I want to be lending my energy to. Again, I'm not trying to be moralistic about that. I'm not trying to be judgmental about that. It's just when you do this stuff for a living, you have to sort of keep your heart protected a little bit, because that negative energy will really become cumulative, and it's not something I think is healthy for people in the long term.
absolutely. I mean, I am a writer. I have to protect myself. And like, if I was writing a book about dysentery, I don't feel the need to go out and get dysentery to write about it. So, that's kind of how I feel. I don't need to be in that kind of energy. And like, yeah, if you are fascinated by true crime or you are interested in that, that's great. I'm very happy that there are people out there who can explore that safely. And I understand the appeal. And I also understand the desire to, be part of criminal justice. I get it. You want to see truth come to light.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it completely. I'm not trying to be judgmental or moralizing, but like, there are certain things I don't feel the need to subject myself to in the name of writing about them. So there was.
But I will totally go to
too
places.
late, Lisa. Too late.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah,
there was another question that was floating around. It floated on my screen. I said something about.
There it is. Yeah.
There it
So
is.
Laura asked a question about research time for traveling and research.
That's a great question. I specifically traveled to the Winchester House. I made a special trip for that. That was an extensive, literally across the country trip for my Winchester chapter. I was not able to do that for every single chapter. If I could get to the location, I tried very much to do so. I tended to pick places where I had been. You'll notice in my chapters that I like Kate, the beautiful stranger, Kate Morgan of the Hotel del Coronado. That was a place I'd had a really strong attachment to as a structure, as a building. Even if I hadn't been to the exact place, if I'd been through the state and had spent some time in the state to get a sense of the vibe of the state, I think that's important. But the bulk of the research for us, especially because we were writing this book through the pandemic, the bulk of it was spent in the research, in the archives, in the emailing historical societies and that sort of thing. So while I think place specific research and trying to visit the place is important, and I do really like to see the location of something, even if I don't want to go into it, I do like to see it. I do like to see its setting for sure. but the bulk of it is always in the papers, as it were.
Yeah, I like the phrase deep archives. I did a ton of armchair archive research, a lot of phone calls, a lot of virtual interviews, a lot of emails. During the time when this book was being written, I was dealing with my daughter's school being closed down like every other week randomly without notice. So travel wasn't really an option. She'd be sent home from school on Tuesday and might not go back till the following Friday. So I couldn't plan anything. I couldn't schedule anything. And if there is a sequel to this book, I would love to do a lot more travel now that we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic a little bit and her school isn't closing down every 5 seconds. Literally, there was one time where her school closed for so long that when it reopened again, we forgot what time to pick her up. We showed up half an hour late and she was sitting in the auditorium because we forgot what time pickup was. So, I mean, yeah, so 99%. And then for volume 2, it's going to be flipped on its head, I hope.
Awesome. Well, if you get to Iowa, please feel free to stop by and say hello.
Oh, you know it.
Iowa. I would love to.
We would love to host you here.
I'm feeling like I leave New York so little, and I have left New York so little in the last couple of years. I'm like, maybe I am a ghost and I can't cross water, which is why I can't seem to get out of New York City. So that's my working theory. Trapped.
Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, Leanna and Andrea. It's been a wonderful time talking with you. I can't wait to get this book in the hands of more people. For those of you, it is A Haunted History of Invisible Women. It's out now. You can get it at our bookstore, swampfoxbookstore.com, or any independent bookstore near you. They'll be happy to order it for you if they don't have it on their shelves. Perfect read for Halloween or any spooky time of the year that you deem that you like. And we hope to do this again soon, hopefully for the next book. Cross our fingers.
Oh, thanks. And thanks for everybody in the comment section for all of your wonderful prompts and all of your suggestions of places. These are definitely going to be places I'm going to follow up with in terms of like our research and things like that. So I just want to thank everyone for that. You know, when you guys participate as an audience, it just means so much to us. So thank you for putting your questions out there and being a part of this.
And thank you for doing the hard and heavy spade work of going to murder houses for us so we don't have to. I deeply appreciate your bravery. Thank you.
Bless you.
All of you guys.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi, this was fun. Thank you. I don't know how to end it because it's not as